From a deal in principle to cancellation of talks over a principle. US President Donald Trump has said the Taliban cannot use violent attacks as a bargaining chip during talks. This after an attack that killed a US soldier. The cancellation comes less than 7 days after US Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad said both sides were close to a deal. Key commitments in that proposed deal: the withdrawal of 5,000 troops from Afghanistan and Taliban promises to prevent Afghanistan from becoming a launchpad for terror attacks against the West. For the time being, all this is on hold, and with it, the lives of the people of Afghanistan.
The decision by Mr. Trump will increase the suicide attacks, as well as attacks in the provinces, districts, and on civilians. So we are concerned about this and hope it's not going to happen.
These peace talks have happened behind closed doors, and Afghans were not involved in them. Even our president was not part of the talks. Since the peace talks began, the suicide bombings and attacks have increased, and our people have been killed. If the Taliban had accepted peace, they should have announced a ceasefire, and then the talks should have moved forward.
And joining me from Kabul is former MP and leader of the Movement for Change political party, Fawzia Kufi. Ms. Kufi, welcome. The Afghan government wasn't involved in these talks from the get-go. Were they doomed to fail?
Well, it's true that the Afghan government was not involved, and the Afghan public and political society in Afghanistan was not involved as to the extent that they were supposed to. But that is one side of the story. I think the major side of the story is the fact that the Taliban have escalated their violence. So the people of Afghanistan are in the middle of the two extreme groups. One is the government, which looks at the peace process from an election lenses, and then the other side is the extreme group of Taliban, which try to kill more people, and they think by killing innocent people, by targeting civilians, they gain more power and share during the talks. So yes, the Afghan government was not involved, but let me also say that the Afghan government was not cooperating and looking at the process from an election perspective rather than a process that is a national need.
But was it only that? You talk about the peace process and the continuing Afghan attacks. The government, supported by foreign forces, did not stop its attacks either on the Taliban.
There was an escalating war, I would say, and violence in the peace process. And I think in many countries, during the peace process, the insurgents do that to gain more share and more for themselves during the negotiation. But what was different in Afghanistan was that more people, innocent people, were killed. So the escalating violence was not only in the battlefield, but on the civilians, in the big cities, on the women and children, on the people that they have nothing to do with this war except that they have been the victim. So yes, it was from both sides. The Afghan government needed to act as a responsible state that represent the will of the people of Afghanistan. Not much expectation from Taliban because many people still regard Taliban as a terroristic network. They also need to, as if they wanted to be part of the process, and if they want to be part of the process, be involved in political atmosphere in Afghanistan in the future, right, they need to and respect the civilians.
Let's just talk about these talks that were happening in Doha. Do you think Afghanistan's interests were at all at the heart of these talks?
Well, let's remember that these talks were between United States and Taliban. And most of the issues that the United States discussed, although they were interconnected with the interest of the Afghanistan and the United States, because we have a common interest. The interest started when the war on terror started, post 11 September. So, but some of these issues were probably issues that needed to be discussed between the Taliban and the US, but some of the issues were issues that the Afghans were supposed to be also on the negotiation table. For instance, about the ceasefire, about the fact that the Americans will not want a guarantee from Taliban that Afghan territory will not be used by terrorist networks against a third country. second country. This is something that to expect it from Taliban, I think, is a bit naive, because at this stage, where you have a state which is officially recognized by the whole world, we have paid a price to establish this institution. Now,
Right.
you bypass this and then ask Taliban to stop to give you a guarantee. I think it was a bit too much for Taliban. So probably some of or ceasefire, for instance, some of these issues were a common interest between United States and Afghanistan, but Afghanistan was not there on the table.
Let's just talk about the Taliban. Now, US President Donald Trump, in his tweet, expressed doubts about whether the Taliban could even negotiate a meaningful agreement. I remember you were at the intra-Afghan talks with the Taliban in July in Doha. Did you get a sense that the Taliban were a united front?
Yeah, I think there was a unity among the military, the political negotiation team, which is in Doha. But I could sense that the military organization or the military division of Taliban probably will not be listening to that negotiation team to the extent that they should have. And that's why when we asked them about the ceasefire, they said that their response was that, we don't have a structured army or security forces that whenever we want them, they can go to the battlefield, and if we don't want them, they can go to ceasefire. It's very difficult for us to mobilize them, and therefore I thought that that is one of the reasons that they don't agree to ceasefire. So yes, also in terms of the political, I think there is a division between the political structure too.
Do you think the talks, when they finally, if they at all proceed, will involve the Afghan government?
I think it should. Looking at the experience of different peace talks in the world, there are times that the talks are cancelled, one part or the other side boycott the talks, but they resume. And I think peace is a need, regardless of who wins and who loses in the peace. We would like to have a win-win situation. People of Afghanistan deserve to live in a peace and prosperous Afghanistan. And that needs some level of courage, some level of sacrifice. Our current government also should not stick to its agenda of only election, because we know how elections were in Afghanistan. I am supporting the elections, and there is no alternative election, but looking at the past elections, we know how the situation was. So I think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the government of Afghanistan, for the politicians, and for the United States to unite their messages, to unite their approach and strategy on this peace talks, and probably start maybe with ceasefire, because this is something people of Afghanistan demand.
Right. Fawzia Kufi, thank you very much for joining us.